All right, so we're now going to be moving on to our next unit, and that's Unit 6. So we're going to be on our first section A of this, and I'm breaking this down to two separate videos. This first video is going to be kind of going over some, hopefully, review things about angles that you may or may not already know, but we're going to be identifying angles and how to name angles. So we're going to be classifying them, identifying them. Also, how do we create angles, and then how do we name them? So like I said, this is a review of going over some things you may have learned even in grade 5. But just in case you haven't, I just need to make sure you have the foundations before we move on to our next video. So our learning objectives for today, and what you should hopefully know how to do, is how to identify different types of angles or classify them, you might hear me say as well. And then also you'll have to be able to name angles. So it's important for you to be able to name them and classify them. All right, so let's first go ahead and talk about angles, and then we'll start getting into our learning objectives. So first, in order for us to learn how to classify or name angles, I have to make sure you understand what an angle actually is. So what is an angle? Well, an angle is a figure that is formed by two rays that share a common endpoint. So when we're talking about angles, we also have to then be able to understand, well, what is a ray? An array is a vector that has one endpoint, and then the opposite side of it is a line that extends to infinity. So what I mean by that is we have an endpoint here, and then it's just a line that goes from that endpoint that goes on to infinity. We can think about when we were graphing all of our inequalities, we were drawing a ray. So here's my endpoint, and here's my arrow that tells me it goes to infinity. And that ray can go in all or any different directions. They can go up, down, they can go left, right. But when we have an angle, it's where we have two rays. So let's say we have a ray here, and I'm going to draw another ray in red that share that common endpoint. So here we actually create an angle within here. So this is our angle. So our angle, or our ray, our angle is created when we have two rays that share a common endpoint. An array is a vector that has one endpoint and the other side goes to infinity. Like I said, it's like when we're graphing our inequalities. Every time that we were graphing those, we were actually drawing a ray. All right, so it's important that you guys understand that this is what an angle is before we can go start talking about naming them or classifying them. All right, so it's formed by two rays that share a common endpoint, and then the angle is this actually here. So it's looking inside of this part, and that's something that we can measure as well. All right, and now that we do know what an angle is, and hopefully you already knew this from before, but now that we've talked about this, we are now going to go into how to name an angle. All right, so when we look at this here, we can see that we have two rays that then form or share a common endpoint. All right, now these rays are often sometimes called sides of our triangle, or you can refer to them as rays as well. But when we name our angle, the vertex that they share, when we name it, it must be the middle letter. So when we write it, we denote that it's an angle using the symbol, and then we start from the side. And we're always going to put a point here. If there's no point there, then you can't name it, and we would just have to use what our vertex is. But we start from our side, and since I have this point A, I can name this angle A, B, C. So we will go side to our vertex and then to our other side. So the vertex must always be in the middle. So your vertex must always be in the middle. Now, I can go ABC, or I can name this angle CBA. These are referring to the exact same angle. It doesn't matter which side we start and end with. What matters is that our vertex is always in the middle. So I can't name this BAC, because then what that's implying is that A is our vertex, and you can see that A is not that common endpoint that these two rays share. So when you're naming your triangle, when you're naming your angle, you must put your vertex in the middle. Now, sometimes you might get an angle that looks a little bit different from this and looks like this one here. So if you get an angle that looks like this, you notice there's nothing written for you on the sides, and all we have here is this H next to our vertex. So in this case, you can just label this angle H. The other one that we had as well, we can label it just angle B if we really wanted to too. But sometimes when we have the sides given to us, it's a must that we use them. And we'll point those out in the future when that's something you have to do. But in this case here, we can just call this angle H. And there's no way that we can name these unless we add it points to those rays. But since there's nothing given to us here, we can just call this angle H. All right. And we'll talk about in the future when you must use the three letters if they're given to you, or if you can just use that one letter. So just to reiterate as well, that one that we just did that had ABC, you could also just call this angle B. as well, and that will be fine. And then we'll talk about in the future when we have to differentiate between when we must use those three to name it and when we don't have to. All right, so now the last thing you must be able to do is you must be able to learn how to classify angles, because when we're getting into the third section of this unit, we'll have to classify triangles. And if you don't know how to classify angles, you can't classify a triangle. So we have three different types of ways that we can classify our angles. We can have an acute angle, a right angle, or an obtuse angle. And an acute angle is an angle that has a measure that is less than 90 degrees. So if we have any angle that measures less than 90 degrees, it is an acute angle. A right angle is our angle that is equal to 90 degrees. So anytime that we have an angle that is equal to 90 degrees, we know it's a right angle. And we can denote that by this little box in the corner. Anytime you see that box, we know it's a right angle. Or we can flat out tell you it's 90 degrees. But a right angle can only occur in one way, and that is when it is 90 degrees. And then an obtuse angle is any angle that measures more than 90 degrees. So anytime it's more than 90 degrees, it is going to be an obtuse angle. And since 135 is more than 90, this is an obtuse angle. Now, you may hear or heard some of your teachers like to try and help you remember this. We can say, oh, it's a cute little angle, and that's how you can remember that it's something that's less than 90 degrees. But these are the classifications that you must know. All right, and just to also say, if let's just say that this was angle A, we would represent this angle A by saying the measure of angle A is equal to 62 degrees. So when we're talking about an angle, so if I want to name this, we want to talk about the actual degrees that we're measuring, we just put the little m out front. That tells us we're now referring to the measurement of it, and we're now referring to the degrees. If we just wanted to refer to this as angle A and period and not talk about its degrees, then we could just name it angle A. So you'll see me sometimes write the M in front and not. And when we write the M in front, that's just telling us that now we're focusing on the actual measurement of it as opposed to just the angle itself and not really talking or caring about its angle measurement in particular. All right, so there's a difference between when we're naming them, just angle A, and when we're talking about the measurements, we want to put that M out front to let the reader know, hey, we're now discussing the measurement. And that is all that you need to know for this video. So we're now going to end this, and you have one more video to watch for this section.